Uh, my dear students, my faculty members, friends in Muğla University, and a handful of followers from all around the world, from different parts of Turkey and world. Today, I got a very, good friend from old days and from Lancaster University, Professor John Whittaker. He's actually grown up in South Africa. He got PhD in physics, but he's very good in economics as well because I took some finance lectures from him. He's a quite tough professor, and he's a politician. He used to be a member of European Parliament, 2004-2009, from Independence Party. Let me also tell my followers and that in 1997, here's the guy told me that Britain will leave EU one day. At those times, nobody listened, John, but nowadays, what we see. So he will give a short speech about what is Brexit, why Britain left EU, and what will happen now. Please, Dr. Whittaker.
Yes, good afternoon. Nice to speak to you and nice to hear from you after such a long time. I thought perhaps I would just make a few opening remarks about how Britain has finally left the European Union. And you'll all be aware that we took a vote in June 2016, which finally took Britain out of the European Union. Britain voted to leave the EU in 2016, but it's taken nearly 4 years before we actually physically leave at the end of this month. So let me just review for one moment what went on during that interim period. It took until 2019 before this so-called withdrawal agreement was finally agreed by the European Union and by Britain. And so that was nearly 3 years of complex negotiations within Britain and European Union, in which the European Union kept presenting Britain with a withdrawal agreement which was so tied up that Britain would really not be leaving. You know, leaving European Union means leaving the single market, which is a load of rules which we have to obey at the moment. It means leaving the customs union, and you in Turkey will know all about what customs union means. In customs union, that binds you to having the same common external tariff as the other members of the union. Well, that was no good for us in Britain. The whole point of leaving was to be out of Europe, of the single market and the customs union, and that was what was voted on. And yet, European Union colleagues did not seem to understand that that's what it meant, and so they drew up this so-called withdrawal agreement, which, in all its effects, kept us in the customs union and the customs union and the single market. Well, that was no use to us. And although the Prime Minister at the time, which was Mrs. May, kept trying to persuade the British public and the British Parliament to accept various versions of this withdrawal agreement, in the whole period of negotiation, Britain's negotiating position was weak. We were on the back foot. Always the Europeans had the running, and the withdrawal agreement was rejected 3 times during 2019 until they finally saw fit to modify it sufficiently to make it acceptable to the British people. And we signed this thing in October 2019. It was ratified here in 2020 February, and we shall finally be leaving at the end of 2020 December. With a few small things to tidy up, but we will finally have left nearly 4 years after we decided to leave. And I suppose one of the reasons why it's been so protracted is that the folks in the European Union have never somehow accepted that we're leaving. Or if we are leaving, it's only leaving in name, but we're not really leaving. I suppose that's the reason that they were so complacent here is that in Britain, we have been so weak in the negotiations. The European Union negotiators only work by, they have their own method of operation, as I've seen myself as a politician, as you point out, in the European Parliament. It's all horse trading. They will trade one thing for something completely unrelated, and we're not used to behaving like that in Britain. We go on principles, we don't go on detail. They have their own ways of doing things. And so the negotiations became sort of at cross purposes all the time, until finally, at the end of 19, I think they began to realize, well, goodness me, these people actually are leaving. They really are leaving. And that surprised a few people, but I still think there are some there who still don't understand that, particularly perhaps the French, who don't understand that we will be taking back control of our fishing waters. Yes, we might let them come and have some part in this, but certainly they cannot expect the same access to fish in British waters as they've had up to now. So that's just a few thoughts about the negotiating process. There are still controversial issues. Fishing is one, although they're showing signs now that they have actually understood what this means. They've been going on for ages about this so-called level playing field, which means that they don't want competition. They don't want Britain to compete with them in international trade. Well, just a moment, please. The whole point of leaving the European Union, or at least one of the main points, was to get our own legislation and on trade, allow us to trade freely with the rest of the world and not be tied down in European Union tariffs and quotas. But they don't want that, and particularly they don't want us to apply so-called unfair competition in terms of so-called state aid rules. They want the same rules, they want our companies and our government to apply the same rules on state aid as they do. Not mentioning, of course, that there's all sorts of examples in the European Union itself of where state aid has been given to companies, particularly France. I mentioned again, where they look after their own national industries. Well, fine, it's all right for them, but it's not all right for us. We must obey all the state aid rules and behave ourselves. So they would not let us have that kind of freedom within the withdrawal agreement. But I think, again, they're beginning to see that actually, if we're going to have any kind of relationship with them afterwards, that we have to have sovereignty. We have to have the ability to make our own rules about state aid and everything else. And if they're nice to us, we play fair. If they're nice to us, we will behave ourselves and be nice back to them. We want a cooperative arrangement, not one that's constantly arguing. You know, I look forward to this, frankly, because I think it's going to mean that when we finally left, I can buy a bottle of wine in my supermarket and not have to buy, other than French, but not have to buy French wines on a preferential tariff. When we've left, I can buy wine that's come from Argentina or South Africa without having to import it over a tariff that prefers French wine. Sorry to bring in a trivial example, but that's the sort of thing that gets up the nose of British people. And it always has. And that'll be a great relief. The companies that have been pressing so much for staying within the European Union are the large British multinationals who have been able to get preferential treatment from our government and from the European Union for their business. Well, they're not the people who provide most of the jobs in this country. So those are people who've been driving the campaign to keep us in the European Union. And I still think that they're almost trying to persuade the government to keep everything very much as it was before, but it's going to change. But now, what will be the final effect of us coming out of the European Union? Probably not very much to begin with. Do not believe all the stories, the fear stories that have been put out by our Treasury, by European Union colleagues, by large business here, by the pro-Europe lobby, which says how dire the situation will be after we left the European Union. For example, just before we took the vote to leave, the British Treasury put out a report saying that there would be terrible unemployment in this country, GDP would fall dramatically. Well, neither of those things happened. And since then, they have been putting out more and more, 2 or 3 or 4 reports saying how awful the circumstances with Britain will be. The economy will be completely smashed. If we do go indeed and leave after all, even though we voted to leave, we must stay very much within the parameters of the European Union. Well, sorry, we are leaving. By the end of the month, we shall have left. And maybe a bit of disruption at the ports to begin with, a few small issues about bureaucracy and paperwork having to be sorted out. My belief, though, is that those things will pass very quickly and we shall find ourselves free, and it will be a great relief. Will we be better off? Yes, I believe we shall, but the main point about us being better off is that we shall have control of our own laws, and I believe that that will probably be the best result from this. Never mind whether the economy is very much better. I think it will be better, but the main advantage for Britain in having left is that we are now in charge of our own rules. Our own parliament, our own government makes our laws instead of having them done by our friends across the channel in the European Union. I think I'll just stop there and let you ask some questions.
You were saying to me, John, in Lancaster Times, there is a potential, I mean, as an alternative to EU, there is a potential for Commonwealth countries, for Britain. Do you think it may replace to EU market, or what do you expect about that? What do you foresee?
I cannot foretell what the patterns of trade will be once we have left. They will shift, but it will be a gradual process. I understand, like you do, that when we first joined up with the European Union, that was a very bad thing for our Commonwealth colleagues, like, for instance, in New Zealand. We used to import a lot of agricultural produce from New Zealand, and that was completely stopped when we joined the European Union. Well, I don't expect that that will return exactly as it was. I have no idea what will be the patterns of foreign trade after the European Union. All I can say is that it will be negotiated to the best advantage of Britain and anybody else who we trade with. I expect you'll see fairly rapidly agreements with America, Canada. We've already got one organized with Japan. I haven't kept up with all the fine detail on this, but you will see, I think, free trade arrangements with many countries happening quite quickly after January.
Okay. I mean, if a foreigner visits, especially London, because as far as my observations, London is different from whole UK, because from Lancaster is a really Britain, but London is quite cosmopolitan place. If you stroll around London, you observe that there's a huge financial flow from all around the world, especially from Arab countries, Arab world, rich countries, from Harrods, and they got properties, buildings, I mean, financial centers, banks, whatever. So, do you think there's a sort of a risk that if you leave EU, to diversification of those, because the huge amount of money is just flowing to UK from those countries, because there's a safe place to invest. What do you think about the Arab world in this sense? After Brexit, I mean.
Well, there will be no change in the attitude of the financial industry in London to doing business with anywhere in the world. What they are concerned about, though, is the ability of London financial companies to operate in Europe. Well, there's nothing stopping our financial institutions doing whatever business they want, but the European Union governments, the Commission, can force European countries to cease doing deals in London itself. Well, that would be bad for business in London, but even worse for businesses in the European Union. They haven't agreed so far on what's called equivalence, which means that we mutually treat each other's laws as binding on ourselves. So equivalence of, for instance, trading processes in London and in the European Union, they haven't agreed that ours are acceptable to them, or vice versa. Although we've offered to do it from our side, they haven't from their side. But I think they'll come round to the idea that London is good for business for the European Union, just as it always has been. There's nothing changed there. It's just that they want to, they would very much like financial business to move to Paris or Frankfurt. Well, if you're going to do that, you've got to make Paris and Frankfurt sufficiently attractive to players in the financial business that they go there anyway. I don't think that the London's business is going to be significantly diminished at all.
All right. Then some people, after the negotiation with EU, the Brexit negotiation with EU, some academia, that's raised the question, there will be next, Italy, Spain, Portugal, there will be new exit or Brexit, Greece will exit from EU. Do you think in coming years or near future, there will be new exits from EU, or is much more strength the power of EU?
I think with all the other problems that are going on at the moment, this is the last thing on the minds of the governments of these other countries in Europe. I'm thinking about the COVID virus now. The last thing they think of is now leaving European Union. Although in the past there have been noises about that other countries might want to leave. I've heard nothing very much significant in recent months and years about anybody else wanting to follow Britain out of the European Union. I suppose you have to look at the advantages which have always been there to other countries from being part of Europe, in that they are bound very much more together, not just by trade, but by borders. There's a lot more. We're an island. They are all close together, except for the island of the Republic of Ireland is going to be very much out on its own across the Irish Sea there. That's a different case altogether. But I haven't heard anything recent about the idea that the Irish might leave the European Union. Whatever you or I might think about it, whether it's a good idea or not. I can't answer your question. I don't have any crystal ball. I don't have a means of foretelling the future here. Nice question, though.
Before, a couple of years, I think it's 2 years ago, there's a referendum in Scotland to leave, United Kingdom. Do you think that this Brexit means push them to new referendum era, or they will much more wish to stay in the Union, Britain, United Kingdom?
You know, if you lived in Britain, you'd probably be as bored as I am with hearing about the Scots going on about independence. They have been talking about nothing else for all this period since the last referendum. Now, amidst all the other troubles, they are still talking about leaving Britain, becoming independent from Great Britain. What would happen? Well, the last referendum surprised them. They lost quite dramatically. I think they would lose quite dramatically again, but that's just an opinion. There would be many others who think it would be a good idea, but there's a lot of political capital here in the Scottish National Party. Their whole existence depends on the thought that they might someday leave the European Union, and it's a kind of one-track politics. That's about the only thing they can think of, never mind the wisdom of doing so. And frankly, I think it would be extremely damaging for them to leave the United Kingdom, purely from a trading point of view, and from the fact that, well, dare I mention it, we give them plenty of money. They get a subsistence from Whitehall continuing all the time through, and of course they would be on their own, and they'd have to look at where the money is going to come from if they did leave the European Union. If they did leave Great Britain. Okay. I don't. If common sense prevails, they won't leave.
Okay. Then last question. I mean, this is a bit around, I'm just not close to your research topic, but as a British, and you are, as far as because we had a couple of conversations when I was in Lancaster, I pop in, you give a time to me, we spend an hour for talking from Ottoman Empire, Turks, whatever, remember, and we're quite, I mean, very good knowledge about Turkey anyway. The question is, we are in the pandemic, which is at last in 1918, I mean, Spanish flu times. And then after Spanish flu, we saw, then 1929, the economic crisis, and then Second World War, and new wave of capitalism, Cold War, and drastic change in world, right? Do you think this situation, I mean, the days, the hectic times now we are experiencing, I know it's not easy to answer my question because it's like speculative, because we can't know, nobody knows anyway. What do you think? I mean, what we'll see? What John Whittaker, the guy who told me one day Britain will leave EU, Ahmed, this is what you told me again. What John Whittaker see for coming years after pandemic?
You are giving me a sort of powers of foresight like a god here. I might have said something sensible about European Union. I have no ways of telling you any more than you know yourself about the progress of this virus, I'm afraid. I'd be interested to know what you have to say for your situation in Turkey, not just about the virus, but also your point about, when we last spoke about this, Turkey was still very keen on keeping in the European Union, in the customs union, wanted to join the EU. That's 20 years ago. I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about the current position in Turkey. Sorry to turn the question around against you, but that's probably the best I can do here.
We are still in waiting room of EU. I don't know actually, because maybe there are different compartments of EU. John, is that one of the solutions they will arrange? I mean, there are two layers of EU. I mean, the one compartment for Western Europe and second for others. I do not know. I'm not quite expert on this, but you are expert. I do know, but I would like to see your really, what kind of world are you seeing coming? Because everywhere is shut down. Now you can't walk around the streets of Muğla. You can't go out. It's not like a wartime, but like a wartime anyway. That's it. Okay.
Well, interesting, but we are in the same position here. We are locked down. We will have a brief relief over the Christmas holiday here in Britain, but other than that, we are locked down. We have been locked down here since March, and none of us like it at all. And the big questions raised all the time as to whether that is the right plan. Should we have been more relaxed and let the virus take over a little more of our lives, or should we be more draconian and be more apply the lockdown rules more rigorously? Nobody knows the answer to this, and the government keeps changing its mind. But then, if I were the government, I don't think I'd know any better how to handle this. Now we have this promise of vaccine. It'll be some time before any value is seen for the whole population from this vaccine, I think.
Okay. John, thank you very much. Just share your valuable time with me, your former students in Lancaster University, and present your ideas. It was marvelous to hear you. As a former European Parliament member, you give us a lecture of how Brexit will manage. Thank you very much, and hope to see you after this chaos ends in Turkey, because I invite you sometime in Izmir years 2 decades ago. Wish to see you again.
Yes. Okay, thank you. I'll look forward to seeing you in the flesh sometime.
All right. Brexit.